Um, this message is probably going to be the last message concerning the world. But one of the things that I wanted to go ahead and get our ducks in a row with is verses that talk about the world in a negative way does not equate to the world being negative. Okay, so let's recap a number of important points. So point number one is that we live in a realm that is concealed and self-contained from the rest of the supernatural worlds or realms, dimensions, if you will. A couple things that are very important about that. The first is that what we have here and the spiritual things that occur here only occur in this realm in an anthropomorphic way. And what I mean by that is that when we're dealing with anthropomorphisms, anthropomorphisms are basically going to be actions of speech, maybe not actions of speech, parts of speech, I guess that you could say, that idiomatically describe an energy. So there's a couple of very important elements of energy that we need to understand. The first one is that it can neither be created nor destroyed. All energy somehow transfers, and a lot of times scientists really don't know where the energy went or what the energy was to begin with. They just know the in between, and really what they know is the symptoms of the energy. When I say symptoms, what I mean is detectable anomalies in an energy system. For example, electromagnetism and its transverse waves are very predictable, very understandable. They are Hertzian, which means they oscillate, they vibrate, they have a frequency, right? All of those things are understandable to science. They're detectable. We can reproduce the experiments in the laboratory, etc. Well, science has two very inherent flaws. The first one is that scientists assume that if it can't be reproducible in a laboratory, then it is not a legitimate theory. And the second issue is that if it can't be proven in any way, then it doesn't exist. Okay? And that is the error of the scientific community. Now, let me explain, because I know there are creation scientists, mongers who would love to jump on board with me, and they would be severely disappointed about my dating and aging of the earth. But in that process, I want to explain and help you understand that just because we can't detect it, or just because we can't test it or reproduce it in a laboratory, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That's an arrogancy we need to get over. Okay. So when we're dealing with lore, okay, now last week I talked about tradition. In the times past, I talked about ceremony. And I tried to explain that when we do ceremony, it's because we are divine beings and we're ignorant of that fact. And so we're instinctually acting something out, right? Now, I didn't say that the resultant violation of human dignity, rights, and happiness was, an exception as a result of ceremony. But what I did say is that even if they were ignorant of truths, they still were acting upon that instinct, and that's going to be important. But today, what I want to get into instead of tradition is I want to get into the misinformation about lore. Okay. So I want you to understand that, first of all of the Bible is lore. Okay, it's folklore. And unfortunately, we could probably say that it is Christian lore, but nonetheless, it's lore. Okay, there's no factual evidence of the Bible any more than there's factual evidence of its skeptics. What I mean by that is, as much as it can be proven, it can be disproven. And Paul even explained this. He said, basically, that faith was what made something real and true when it was not seen or understood. Okay? So I want you to think about the vastness of the universe for a minute. I want to think about the idea of these huge anomalies in space that would just snuff us out in an instant. And I want you to ask yourself, is God, and I'm going to use this term in terms, I speak as a Christian, okay? I'm speaking as a Christian. Is God bigger than those anomalies that could destroy the earth? Well, of course, most people are going to say yes. Okay, is he in control of those anomalies? So let's talk a minute about the magnitude of energy of a nebular star, like a nebular star system. So a star system that has a birthing center or a dead star for stars. Okay, so either the star died and created this big old gas cloud, and we'll call it a nebula, or stars are just now being born there. Now, I want you to think about the sun for a minute when we're talking about how hot and how bright and how powerful the sun is. And of course, we've got the tritium deuterium process going on in the sun. It is a hydrogen ion reaction going on in the sun. The density creates a gravity, which maybe that could be argued is not necessarily what's happening, but the density definitely results in an explosion eventually. And that explosion pushes outward, and that outward explosion creates an extraordinary amount of energy and heat. Consequently, even though that it is really far away, it gets here in a very small amount of time. The heat and radiation and energy and light that we experience. Well, there's a few reasons why this is important. The first and major point that I would like to touch upon is the idea that if a star much larger than ours is born in this moment, God is even bigger than that. Okay? So let's say a star that's 30 times bigger than the sun is just now in its inception. God is bigger than that. And really, that aspect of the cosmos is quite minuscule in comparison to the consciousness that is present in this whole function. Okay? Or maybe I should say in this whole functional universe. It is very important for you to take into consideration that the consciousness itself knows every single star in the universe. In fact, it says that he named them. Okay. So I think you can understand that we are not dealing with a human being here. Okay, and anybody who's got this weird idea that there is a flesh and body human being somewhere floating out in the cosmos, sitting on some throne, actioning the process of creation, destruction, and everything in between, I got news for you. It doesn't really work that way. Okay? This realm and the rules of this realm apply to this realm, and that's it. So when we are working with a model of this magnitude, there's a couple things that you need to know. The first one is that we're dealing with energies, okay? Energies. So lore comes along and lore tries to describe those energies, okay? Now, Yeshua makes a statement. He says, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. Okay. Now, there's a number of ways that we could go about understanding this, but what I want you to take into consideration is that the standard of righteousness, the standard of how you function as a divine being stuffed into a human meat sack, actually navigate the belief system behind this intensification of all power in the universe, who breathed stars out of his mouth, is, and it will always be, needed to be understood in a folklore manner. Now, Abraham says, or Yeshua says, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. During Abraham's lifetime, something very interesting happens, okay? And I know this is going to be quite controversial, but I want you to understand how this works. So, of course, you guys remember he goes down to Egypt, lies about Sarah being his wife. And of course, Pharaoh takes Sarah. And of course, then there's the plagues. And then Pharaoh figures out what's going on, asks Abraham to leave, gives him a bunch of riches, blah, blah, blah. Well, then Abraham goes and does it again with Abimelech of Gerar, which is king of the Philistines. Now, the Philistines end up being a problem for Israel all the way until, I believe, the death of Saul and David becoming king, and something changed in that whole political environment of the Philistines. But it is very relevant that we understand that that is the same nation. I want you to think about this. So David sees Goliath and said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that defies the God of Israel?" Right? Well, let's break that down for a minute. What is an uncircumcised? They are outside the covenant of Abraham. Not the covenant of Israel, but the covenant of Abraham. The covenant of Abraham is ratified through circumcision. The covenant of Abraham is a promise to a land that to this day has yet to actually have its boundary markers. And so when we're dealing with the promise of Abraham and circumcision, what David is saying is, who is this man on Abraham's land without circumcision? Right? Who are you? What are you doing on my land? Right? That kind of thing. The next thing he says is uncircumcised Philistine. He's quick to identify that not only is he not Israelite, which means he's not under the covenant of Israel that was ratified at Sinai and then was renewed with Yeshua's death. He's a Philistine. He's not even Israel. So not only is he uncircumcised, which means he does not have a promise to the land, but then on top of that, he is actually a Philistine. He's not even Israelite. That defies the God of Israel. Well, here's the interesting thing about it. He says, I defy Yahweh. I defy the Lord. I defy the God of Israel, right? So he's recognizing that Yahweh is a God. And that's why David said that way. But what I want you to think about is Abimelech of Gerar is that same uncircumcised Philistine now dealing with Abraham, okay? So what happens? So now he takes Sarah into his house. And of course, during the night, he comes to God, speaking of God in a Christian sense, comes to Abimelech in the night and says, "You are cursed. You are a dead man." And he says, "Lord, would you destroy a righteous nation for one man's sin?" Something along those lines. That might be a little bit paraphrased. I'm not going to go there. And of course, Yahweh turns around and does not even wink at the idea that he said it was a righteous nation. Now, I want you to think about this, okay? If we're dealing with God in the Christian sense, which is going to be the creator of heaven and earth, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? So if we're dealing with God in that sense, and he has the function of being able to speak to Abimelech in his dream, and Abimelech's interpretation is that we're dealing with the God of the universe, Abimelech also doesn't bat an eye. Abimelech also responds as if he understood. His soul was like, "Oh, yeah, my bad. I know you. You're that one guy before I ever even came to this earth. Okay, well, anyways, would you destroy a righteous nation for one man's sin?" Right? Okay. Well, so there's a couple of very important things here, and I always pay attention to the reactions, right? I pay attention to the Hebrew grammar and see whether or not there's actually a reaction behind the statements. Now, you guys know the reason why emojis exist is because when you send a text, you can't express emotion. But I want you to think about this. So Abimelech doesn't go, well, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know what the problem is. Or worse yet, Abimelech goes, "Oh, woe is me. I'm an uncircumcised Philistine." No, he actually argues with whatever manifestation of the intensification of all power in the universe it was. It was enough for him to know that he was a destroyer, right? Would you destroy, right? Okay, so then what happens next? He says, this woman is married. Abimelech's like, "Well, how was I supposed to know?" Okay, so again, we're dealing with God here. Like Abimelech does not. This isn't like Abimelech's like, "Okay, you're which 365th God are you?" Right? He doesn't do that. He knows who it is, and in that process, he says, "Would you destroy righteousness?" Okay, so two very important things. Number one is we could lean in the direction that Abimelech was ignorant in calling his nation righteous, right? Or perhaps maybe Abimelech wasn't speaking of his nation and maybe was speaking of another nation who is righteous. But I really don't believe that's the case, because God tells Israel when they're going into, again, Christian God tells us when you're going into the promised land, tells the Israelites, you're not going in because you're good or righteous. You're going in because you're better than them. Right? Okay. So a righteous nation. He's going to tell the God of Israel, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He didn't even know who Israel was yet. Would you destroy a righteous nation? Okay. The standard of righteousness by which somebody could understand and speak to the God of creation and tell them that their nation is righteous, if Abimelech was indeed speaking of the Philistines, uncircumcised Philistines, uncovenanted people. And he says they're righteous. There is only one standard of righteousness in the universe. Only one. Let me repeat it for you. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. Let me paraphrase it a little bit different for you. He made the Lamb who was slain from the foundations of the earth to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. So when Abimelech says, will you destroy the righteous? He understood. Somehow he understood the covenant that Abraham was in with Yahweh. And somehow he understood he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. And who knows, maybe Abraham was preaching. Remember, he added over 318 souls from Ur of the Chaldeans until the promised land. 318 souls were with him, right? And it says there was 70 when he left Haran. 70 souls which he had added to himself. Souls, nafashim, right? Okay. And so what I want you to understand is it's possible that Abraham was maybe doing some evangelizing, right, of some sort in the land of the Philistines when he went to Abimelech's kingdom in Gerar. Now, there's a couple very important things that we need to discuss, and the first would be is that we're not talking about all of the Philistines. There were a number of different Philistine city-states, but they all kind of had a convention, as it were, of princes. Well, anyways, Abimelech of Gerar was definitely one who had a very peculiar way of dealing with the God of the universe, didn't he? He was not ashamed because he wasn't uncircumcised. He wasn't ashamed because he was a pagan. He wasn't ashamed because he was any of those things. And when it comes time for him to be a dead man, because that woman is married, he says, would you destroy a nation for one man's sin? Okay, so let's get this straight. You want to talk about arrogance. This guy just told God, look, if you destroy me, my nation is going to perish, right? That's exactly what he just told God. He said, look, I realize I may have done something wrong and you could destroy me, but you're destroying this whole nation who's righteous. By what standard? Remember, he's talking to the intensification of all power in the universe. So who's righteous, right? Okay. When I talk about understanding that when Yeshua says, Abraham saw my day, we need to accept that the information concerning the Lamb being slain from the foundations of the earth was pre-existent before Yeshua showed up on the earth in the flesh as the Torah having become flesh. Okay, that's important. Now, when we are dealing with that thought process, we need to migrate all of the information we thought we understood about the Old Testament into a more containable truth, that the standard by which righteousness or the standard by which anything occurs is going to be the same from the beginning of time until whatever is over here at the other end, which we may or may not call the end of time. Because we know also that it seems as though the intensification of all power in the universe, who stuffed himself into a perceivable God, Yahweh, seems to have communicated that this is a very cyclical process. That just like there is a 365-day revolution around the sun, there is a huge revolution in the universe, and that is cyclical. And what we would perceive to be time end would be the beginning of a new cycle. Okay. So when we're dealing with lore, a couple things that we need to understand is that anthropology and archaeology have a tendency to say that lore is just that. It's stories, and there's no necessarily any factual proof of it. So depending on how anti-Semitic or how anti-Christian or how anti-Torah or anti-Yahweh an individual is, they may claim that lore is unsubstantiated and therefore not provable, but the truth is that lore for us is mythology. and it's as mythological as, say, the Iliad. We believe in a God and a Son, and we believe in these other stories in this compendium of stories, which has been unfortunately mislabeled the Bible. Now, in that process, I think that we also need to accept that there is also there is a lot of unfortunate mistakes made either in the direction of bias or in the direction of ignorance or in the direction of intentional both, right? Intentional ignorance and intentional bias coming in the form of a demand for people to believe in a certain doctrine a certain way, and there's no other logical conclusion. But the problem is that in all of that mythology and in all of those things we have encountered, we are experiencing a logical approach to a mythological system. And I'm going to take it a step further and say it's not even mythological, it's mystical. And I'm going to propose to you that there is no other version of reality. There's mystical reality, and then there's the imagination of those who would love to just assert what they think is the right way, what they think is the truth because it's quote unquote provable, etc., etc. The reason I bring this up is because when we work with a model of something so massively vast and powerful, we need to take into consideration the reason why it would instruct us to do things a certain way, act a certain way, and whatnot. So if we go with the no-hide laws, okay, and I'm just going to mention a few, I'm not going to mention them all. One of them has to do with cruelty to animals. Now, in the common sense human being who is in a semi-healthy state, an average state, cruelty to animals does not necessarily result in it's common sense. You're not mean to it. It's defenseless, right? So we're not I'm not what I'm saying is I'm not trying to be dealing with psychopaths or people who have abuse issues or whatever and harm animals. I'm dealing with people who are instructed not to harm animals, and so we need to ask, why are they given those instructions? And when we talk about the no hide laws, just so you know, you could put a kippah on your head, because when you go into a synagogue, you have to have a kippah on your head. You can go into you could put a kippah on your head. You walk into a synagogue. They say, "Who are you?" You say, "I'm a no hide," and they'll make you go sit down in a certain spot, depending on how orthodox they are, and that's it. You can hold pick the prayer book out of the pew and say the prayers with them. Was circumcised or uncircumcised, studied with a rabbi for a year, unbaptized, unmikvahd, and still participate in services because they acknowledge a no-hide. So that's why I bring up the no-hide laws. So the premise is that we're going to deal with the concept of animals, and the reason we are is we're going to talk about why would there be an instruction not to be cruel to animals. Most common sense people, regardless of how weird they are, would not, and when I say weird, what I mean is no matter how far off of truth they are, they still would be kind to an animal. Okay? So why be told not to harm them? Well, we could really quick go look at this. This is going to be in Genesis chapter 9. And it's where we have the covenant with the covenant with rainbow, okay, or what we call the Noachic covenant. And so we go over to Noach, and let's see, let's go here. And then I believe. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth on the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb hath been given to you all things. Okay. So, aside from the obvious Christian attempt to say that this means you can eat shellfish and you can go eat those cockroaches that crawl on the seabed, shrimp and lobsters, or that you could go eat the trash eaters, the schwein, right? The pigs, pork with their parasites and their tapeworms that eat your brain. Let's not go there. Let's stick with the concept here that the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth. This is actually where they get the no hide commandment to be kind to animals, because they're afraid of us. But why give that instruction to a common sense? Let's explain this. Torah assumes a common sense human being who does not have wounds, who does not have entitlements, does not have limiting beliefs, doesn't have a lack of imagination, who is trying to make a life for themselves. Why would they give that commandment? Because there is an absolute dark and sinister, and in the Christian sense of evil practice of violently taking the life of an animal in order to excite the steroidal transfer of chemicals into the bloodstream so that when they drink the blood, they are invigorated. That's right. Gentiles had to be given the commandment not to sacrifice animals, not to hurt them while they're sacrificing them. Now you say, oh, wait a minute, what about God? He says that you got to go sacrifice these animals. And okay, first and foremost, let me make something clear. The word sacrifice does not exist in the religion that was stolen by Christianity. The word sacrifice is a very inappropriate way to explain that Hebrew word, which I believe is shatach, but I don't quote me on that. The Hebrew word itself is slaughter, to divide up. Okay? That's what that word sacrifice actually means. Now, don't get me wrong, like the word olah, which is the raised up offering, or the other offerings, the wave offering, etc., etc. They're not offerings, they're not sacrifices. Those are inappropriate words to be assigning to those Hebrew words. But those Hebrew words don't have an English equivalent, so we do the best we can. Well, unfortunately, there's an entire religion called Christianity based upon the idea that there was a point in time when those sacrifices were sufficient, and they never were. According to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 9, I believe it is, the blood of bulls and goats, might be 9:10, the blood of bulls and goats never offered a remission of sin. Meaning what? Meaning that is not what they were doing. But even so, how did they deal with their animals? Well, first of all, of course, I've talked about this before. I've talked about the shechting process by which they embrace the animal. They cuddle it. And as they cut its neck, it's not even aware, because the knife is so sharp, it's not even aware that it's bleeding. And it literally bleeds to death. And if you're going to eat meat, this is how you kill an animal. You don't take a bolt that is fired by a CO2 tube and plant it inside of their brain or at their spinal cord to kill them. You let them bleed out. And that does two things. Number one, the hormones are never pushed into the blood, so you get the purest version of meat. And second, as you are preparing that animal for slaughter, okay? When you go hunting, for those of you who hunt, you good Christian men in your hunting, right? It's like a rite of passage. You go hunting, and when you do, you shoot the animal, you quarter it so that it can be packed out. Do you ever call that a sacrifice? Do you ever say, I have sacrificed this deer in the name of Yahweh so that I can have a remission of sins? Well, guess what? Neither did the Israelites. That's not how it worked, okay? But anyways, now we have this idea that there is a violent way to slaughter an animal to prepare them to be eaten in the next verse. I mean, look at this. The next verse, every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb hath been given you all things, but the flesh with the life thereof, which is in the blood thereof, you shall not eat. And surely the blood of your lives will I require. All right, so yeah. So blood, a big no-no. So what do the Gentiles do? They drink blood, or they dip eggs in blood, or they pour out blood on the ground. And what does it say? Listen to what it says. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. The hand of every beast will I require it. And at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. Okay? Now, what's important to understand about that is that the earth was no longer going to receive that blood. It was no longer going to accept it. So as the blood is poured out on the ground, it cries out, and there's nothing to receive it, and therefore an avenger of blood comes. Now, we now see that instruction of Torah is given in such a way as to cause a human being to not do something or do something that they're supposed to do. But why? What is the reason why it is such an important thing to not be cruel to the animal while you are slaughtering it, or worse, be cruel to the animal in order to have a certain blood type come out of it and consume that blood? Now, the reason I'm using animals is because I can't be graphic and describe what they actually did to human beings, specifically female human beings, and specifically female human beings who were still virgins. Okay? So we're going to stick with the animals. And we're going to talk about the strangling and the terror that they would whip these cattle or these sheep or pigs even with with whips until they bled. They would just terrorize these animals to satisfy their God. Well, interestingly enough, in all that whole process, we are given instruction not to. Okay? Now, when we start to talk about a curse, we need to get past the Christianese definition of curse. Okay? Two very important points that need to be brought forward. Point number one, when we are dealing with the word curse, we probably need to understand its origins. Okay, that's one. But the second is that we need to understand that the word curse itself is not about speaking profane or inappropriate speech in a given language. So saying something inappropriately about a woman's body part in Russian is not a curse. And you need to understand that the falsity of saying things like God damn or Jesus Christ is not cursing, is not taking the Lord's name in vain. That is a very inappropriate interpretation of that verse. But I want you to understand that when we have old school traditional Christians going, oh, you shouldn't speak like that, that's cursing, you have no idea what cursing is. Because I'm about to teach you about cursing. This whole entire message is about the curse. And I'm going to tell you the reason is because of the world. Now, at the beginning, I said we needed to recap and we needed to connect some things. And so we've already began to understand, that what we think we understand about Torah, the Bible, the Tanakh, the quote unquote New Testament, we need to have within context. And the reason why this is so important is because, again, any attempt to apply these verses to your life will be a renegotiation of those verses because of their context in which they were written and because of the culture of that time. Now, it is inappropriately dispensational to say that God adjusts himself to cultures, but cultures adjust themselves to their moments. And what I mean by that is that there is a very specific culture that was never, ever supposed to die. And there was a very specific set of traditions that were never, ever supposed to die. And there was a very specific set of lore that is absolute truth. Then there's a bunch of fluff. And that fluff is called religion. The rest is truth. So, a number of things that we need to get our minds wrapped around is the idea that the field spoken of in Yeshua's discussion is absolutely about the world. Okay. Furthermore, we need to make a distinction between the world sown with bad seed and the world sown with good seed, and the usage of the two, because the truth is that people think that the world is themselves in either a saved state or an unsaved state. In fact, Christians are arrogant enough to say that they are not the world. Now, of course, Paul says we are in the world, but not of it. But that's a verse you don't understand because you don't understand the world. You see, the good sower comes along and sows good seed into the world. And here's the intrigue. In the other parable of the sower, the seed is the word of God. And I can tell you what the word of God is not. It is not the New Testament. I can tell you the word of God is not. It is not Isaiah, Jeremiah. It is not the prophets. I can tell you what the word of God is not. It is not the Psalms. It is not the Proverbs. It is not the book of Revelation. It's Torah. And it's specifically the Torah that has been written upon your heart. But I digress. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. It is the scroll. It is the writings that were written down by Moses, communicated to Joshua and the people, and passed on from generation to generation to generation through the priesthood and eventually through the other teachers of the law, as it were, on down until we get into the Hasmonean dynasty. And of course, then we get into the Pharisees and et cetera, et cetera. But my point is that the word is sowed into the field. Now, King Uzziah, King Uzziah, was a very interesting king. There were three very important points that came forward from his life. The first is that he was the first to invent or implement siege engines. He made machines for war. Okay. We don't know if it was the catapult. We don't know if it was the siege towers. We don't know anything of what it was, but we do know that it is documented in Chronicles that he had come up with siege engines. And then the second, and this is the most important one, is that he had a relationship with the soil. He was a gardener. But the chronicles of the kings are trying to communicate that this king was different from other kings and that he had a connection with the earth that was different from the rest of them. And if you just get caught up in the English translation, you miss a lot of what is being said there. But the short version is that he had a deep connection to the actual dirt of the earth. He was grounded and he was connected with it. Now, when I say that he had a relationship with the soil, he had a relationship with the earth, he had a relationship with sowing into this thing that it seems you need to be very cautious of. Now, there is a number of points that need to be brought forward, but we need to add one more thing in there, and that is that the world and its traditions are destructive, and traditions are dangerous and should be practiced in such a way as to elevate and not to cause dissension or disunity or destruction. Traditions are dangerous. And the reason why I tore into people last time was because traditions are destroying us. There is a tradition called Christianity, which is not a religion. It's a tradition. And there is a tradition called Judaism, which is not a religion. It's a tradition. And then there's a religion that is made up of the truth that is no longer practiced, that is true religion, according to James. And in all of that, it is an intentional, obedient adherence to the teaching and instruction of God, known in Hebrew as Torah, known in English as the law. So the good sower comes along and he sows the Torah into the world. So I want to talk a minute about this concept of being a friend of the world versus a friend of God. We read that in the first instance of our world teaching. We came up with a foundation to build all this off of, which was that double-mindedness was dangerous, and what double-mindedness actually was. Now, I think it's important for us to understand that the world itself is being described as a field, as something to be sown into. So now I want to kind of take this onto like a cosmic level. And the cosmic level that I want to take it onto is that the field or the world is an energy source. And that energy source is in it of itself not the energy giver. Okay? The energy source itself is just a conduit of information and power and jurisdiction granted to us from something higher. So it says that there was good seed sown into the world. Now, there's a couple things I want you to think about. If you all are gardeners, when we're dealing with relationship, there's a number of things that we need to get across. First is that means to repeat or to cycle, right? Lot is latiamus. It is the lateral movement. So a repeated lateral movement, which means a going back and forth. Why return to the same spot again? Because our brains reward us for returning there. That's relationship. So in one case, we have a king who has a relationship with the soil, and the soil is the field that's being sown into. So when he has a relationship with the soil, he's sowing into the soil. Then one could argue that he had a relationship with the world. So is the Old Testament contrasting or contradicting the New Testament, in which overrides which? Well, first of all, just for the record, Torah overrides everything and Tanakh overrides everything. So short version is that the New Testament is under the authority and scrutiny of the prophets. The prophets are under the authority and scrutiny of the writings, and that is under the authority and scrutiny of Torah. Why do I say that? Because before there was writings like the Psalms, there was Torah. Why? Because in Psalm 119, David teaching Solomon about Torah says, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." 119, 105. Thy word didn't exist beyond the 5 books of Moses, the annals of the wars of Israel, which would contain Joshua and would talk of the judges, and Ruth was his grandmother, meaning the word that he speaks of, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and light unto my path, is Torah. Furthermore, Isaiah says, oh, you guys are violating all of God's laws. You're violating the word of God. Yahweh says to Isaiah, my word will not return void. My Torah will not return void. So Torah is sown into this world, or sown into this field. Now, again, I asked this question last time. If God so loved the world, but we are not to love the world, then we could say that we probably need to reread the verse that says, if you're a friend of the world, then you are not a friend of God. You are double-minded. But we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to find out if there is any indication beyond the Noachic laws that Gentiles, who we will define in the Pauline and the Mishnaic period definition, which would have been during Yeshua's time, of what a Gentile or nation is. A, they are not covenanted with Yahweh. Now, this is a very important truth because the covenant aspect affords you the promises of Abraham if you're circumcised. Although Paul indicates that that circumcision is of the heart first. Who cares about the flesh? Now, I propose to you that if you do become circumcised in the heart, you probably will end up becoming circumcised in the flesh. It's just a process that kind of follows suit. Next, and this is important, we need to talk about the concept of Gentile in the sense of not a foreigner dwelling among you. Remember, the Torah applies, especially the Torah of Passover applies even to the foreigner dwelling among you or the stranger dwelling among you. Now that can fall into one of two categories, either a God-fearer, which is a Noahide, okay? So they're going to practice the Noahidic laws and they're going to dwell with Israel in shalom. In other words, they're not a covenanted Israelite, but they are dwelling among the Israelites, and nobody's allowed to just violate Torah because they're not a Jew. It doesn't work that way. The law of the land is the law of the land, right? Correct. It's like some Canadian coming into America and saying that he doesn't have to follow the American laws because he's not American. So now we have a Gentile as somebody who's not covenanted and not dwelling among you. Why? How do I know that? Because Paul creates a shock to the system by saying if a Gentile, though not having the law, does the things of the law, he makes himself a law unto himself, and he demonstrates that the law is written on his hearts. What kind of Gentile has the law written on his hearts? One who is what? One who is in fear of Torah. Because the only way that the law could be written upon your heart is if they were part of the new covenant. So Paul uses Gentile to shock the Pharisees who he's writing in Rome. By the way, Romans was written to Pharisees. Okay, so at any rate, he's trying to shock these Pharisees in Rome. He's trying to say, hey, look, you guys understand, you guys are guides, you guys know the Torah, you guys guide people, you guys are leaders of the community, right? So he wants to shock them. If a Gentile does Torah, where did he get it from? Right? Okay. So the premise is that when we're dealing with this thought process concerning Gentiles, we need to understand that that's not necessarily the world. Again, we have this Christianese verbiage that indicates that if someone is saved, they are not of the world, right? They are not the world. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, right? You guys need to hear that verse. Loved the world. But something's in the world. Something's not of the world, but it's in the world. And it is an activator, a polarizer, a tweaker causing the energy of the world to move a certain direction if indeed it is applied. Okay. How can I do this? I'm actually gonna do this by illustrating on the board. That's gonna be my direction here, I think, on this. So we will go to the board. Let's get some pins figured out here. Let's go blue today on that one. Okay. All right. So let's start with a pitcher of water. Okay. And we'll put some water in there. Okay. And then we're going to come over to here and we're going to create a little cup for us to receive that water into. It's harder to drink out of a pitcher than out of a cup, isn't it? And it has a little bit of water. Okay. So scientists say that if this particular cup here is somehow tipped over, say like, let's do this way. Let's say the cup is tipped over on its side. And then, of course, we have spillage. Now, scientists say that when the cup is in this state, it is, actually, no, I'm going to label this with some red. This is potential energy. Because the cup, spelled that wrong, because the cup is in a state, did it again. There we go. Potential energy. The cup is in a state of rest, okay? And they say that when the cup is tipped over, that this is kinetic. Actually, I think that is supposed to be kinetic energy, right? Kinetic energy. And why? Because now the water is moving in this direction. The cup has fallen over, right? So that's potential energy versus kinetic energy. Now, when we look at this cup, we say, well, there's not a whole lot of water in this cup, so this cup can be filled more, okay? And so when we're talking about kinetic versus potential energy, one of the things that we need to take into consideration is that potential energy in terms of a vessel of reception needs be empty enough to receive, okay? Meaning all of this right here is potential. Let's go ahead and label that. Potential. Okay, potential. And all of this down here is what has already occurred, okay? Or what we could potentially call finished. Now, does the glass ever actually have to get any liquid poured into it? No. Furthermore, what is going on here? Is this finished? Or is this potential? Now, here's something interesting about it. Does the pitcher ever actually have to pour out? No. But the pitcher has a purpose. Yes, to store water, of course. But the pitcher also contains this piece here, which is designed for a very specific purpose. It is to transfer that which is potential from itself into that which has potential to receive. Okay? So we can say that this action here of transfer is sowing, right? Okay. And we also know that there's something very specific that has to occur in order for that sowing to exist, called empathy. Okay, so now what we need to talk about is if Torah is sown into the field as a potential, the field itself is a potential. The Torah is an instruction on how to use that potential, okay? Another way we could think about this is if your very, very wealthy special uncle leaves you a safe that is inside of a bank. You go and you open that safe, and the note says, use this for whatever you need. And inside are stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of $100 bills. You say, okay, I need to use this for whatever I need, so I'm going to activate this energy that's in this safe to accomplish what I need to do, which are the instructions that were given on the piece of paper. So now we'll figure out what the need is, and now we can use that money, right? Let's say maybe it gets a little bit more, let's say it gets a little bit more complicated and you have to show cause. So now you have to show why you need that energy. Why do you need that potential? Why do you need that resource? Because all the world is a resource. Now, it is very important to understand that that resource is a cultivating system. What do I mean by that? What you put into it is what you will get out of it. It is a reciprocator, okay? But it is foundationally tied to the good seed. And so from that perspective, then, if it's tied to the good seed, then we need to understand that if it's tied to the good seed, then it is going to be potentially good if you activate the field of energy through the actions of Torah. Okay? Again, we go back to the why. Why do we have this? Well, what did I say when I was talking about the no-hide law of cruelty to animals? Am I talking about going out and beating a donkey because it doesn't do what it's supposed to do? No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an intentional harming of the animal to torture it, to in order to create a system by which you will eventually bloodlet, and then you will give homage to a false god. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. When we talk about the 10 Commandments, we do not acknowledge that he's the Lord God who brought us out of Egypt. Why? Because we've never been to Egypt. Why? Because in the American Christianity churchism, the Jews went through Egypt, not understanding what the word Mitzrayim means, what the word Matzar means, what the word Mitzrim means. It is very important for you to understand that in all of this process, when it says, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that commandment was the first, and of course, it was the commandment that was taught to the children, the first commandment that's taught to the children. And then their children teach it to their children. Torah, as a folklore, was passed down with that first commandment. When they're teaching the 10, of course. Okay, so now, it is very important to understand that every single last commandment is applicable to Deuteronomy chapter 28. And furthermore, we need to understand that the Torah is applicable to anyone who activates it. According to Paul, if a Gentile, though not having the law, does the things of the law, he activates the law. He becomes the lawgiver, the law receiver, and the law obeyer. That's what it means by he's a law unto himself. He is the jurisdiction of himself. Now, it is important to ask the question then, was Torah given to the Gentiles? The answer is yes. The answer is that every single last area of the Torah that contains information about the Torah is absolutely about all human beings. In fact, the no-hide laws are actually points on a map of Torah that are landmarkers. Because in the end, there was something that had occurred before the flood that was instructed to not be practiced after the flood. And that thing was, you were not to exploit and kill human beings, nor animals, nor were you to treat the environment in such a way as to indicate that you actually don't care for it. You were to have a relationship with the soil. Why? Because the agricultural system is allegorically attached to an anthropomorphical explanation of what the energies actually are. Because when you go to the top of the cosmos, we're no longer dealing with a human being stuffed in, or I mean, a spiritual being stuffed into a meat sack. We are dealing with a spiritual being that is on the level and magnitude of star breathing. Now, it is very important in that process for you to grasp we are not dealing with an anthropomorphic system. The field is an allegory for that potential energy that can be harnessed. Now, let me tell you something. I began my journey with God at a very young age. It wasn't about salvation. It wasn't about relationship. It was just present, and I was very aware of it. And he was not quiet. The religion that my parents chose was a religion that taught that if you were not actually saved in that religion, then you were of the devil. And so in that process, when we finally got kicked out of that religion, there's nowhere else for me to go. I got this guy talking to me in my head, and this guy is telling me these things about the world, the universe, life, and now I'm somehow his enemy. And so in my mind and in my dysfunction, I concluded that I could only operate in this world as the devil's agent. And I became very educated, active, and practicing in Satanism. And in that process, I saw power, real power, not manipulating x-rays to try to prove that they are legit, not switching out records, not having actors in my audience, real power. And I can tell you that at that time, I would take Christians on. Man, they would come to me and try to deal with me in the name of Jesus, right? Try to win an argument, try to stop my power, right? Try to stop my curses that I would pronounce upon them. They could not defeat me. And I can tell you that when I came into Christianity, when I was delivered from all of that, when I was brought into a knowledge of truth and of Torah and of light, nobody could explain why I had the power. Nobody could explain why I saw the things that I saw, heard the things that I heard, and experienced the things I experienced. And I can tell you that it taught me something. This field, anybody can use it. But there's only one right way to use it. There's only one way that actually goes with the flow of the instruction of the intensification of all power in the universe, and that's Torah. And I can tell you, if I look back now, I can see in our spells, in our curses, in the things that we were doing, Torah. Now, you may be absolutely appalled of what I just said. But what I am saying is that the instructions that we were given on how to do rituals are very similar to the instructions that were given to the Levitical priests. And the instructions that we were given about how we're supposed to think and how we're supposed to act and what we were supposed to do were given to the Israelites when they were told how to go into the promised land and take it. Same energy. The field that was sown into has within it tares. Tares. Not terrors, as in something fearful, but the false wheat. Now, as a connoisseur of the book of Revelation for a very, very long time, until the Father literally told me I was no longer allowed to study it, figure that one out. All of you who just go read it and then all of a sudden decide that that's what's happening in the world right now, I got you beat. I used to sit down with a USA Today, a Jerusalem Post, the Bible, and a highlighter. Long before there was internet. And find the signs. They're there if you look for them, but I can show you all the skepticisms of it. And I can also prove to you that every single last generation before you, since Paul, actually did the same thing. And if you understood Paul's words, you would understand he had no thought in his mind that it was going to happen in his lifetime. But since Paul, everybody's been trying to do that. The date setters especially. And since I was raised in a date setter religion, I was pretty prone to thinking that that's the way things were supposed to be. And of course, I got delivered from that too. But the power, the energy, the dunamis, the thing that went out of Yeshua, the thing that people are going to do in his name. Oh, I wish you understood in his name. But the things you're going to do, they're going to do in his name, and then he's going to say, depart from me, I never knew you, you workers of lawlessness. You don't even practice Torah, and you're messing with my power. I don't know you. You stole from me. When I was doing those rituals and casting those spells, and they were happening, and things were going crazy, and I was very aware of their evidence, which convinced me that I was in the right religion, a power I have yet to see in Christianity, I can tell you, I was stealing. I was one of those casting out demons in his name, so to speak. Now, granted, I wasn't doing it in his name. Why is this so important? Because I want you to understand that A, the field is all around you. B, it was sown with good seed for a reason. There is a right way to do things that does not exploit human beings. It does not inappropriately destroy human beings. You say, well, what about God commanding Joshua to wipe out these children, wipe out these women, right? What about Jericho? Again, what were they doing that was so bad? Remember, Yahweh says, I'm not sending you in because you're good people or righteous. I'm sending you in because you're better than them who are there. What are they doing so bad? Look at the junk that the Israelites were doing. They build a golden calf and have an orgy. What about the Valley of Hinnom? In Israel. Oh my God. If you really thought about that right there, that part right there, the Valley of Hinnom, Your head should start to hurt. That in God's promised land is the most efficient, effective, and demonic system of sacrificing children in all the earth at that time. That should boggle the mind. The Valley of Hinnom. That Josiah had to go and destroy and unseat the authorities of demonic power that were present in that place and start a fire there that burned all the way to Yeshua's time that was called Gehenna. Gehenna, or Valley of Hinnom in the Hebrew. And Gehenna, right, is what is all of his parables about hell are Gehenna. All of his discussions about the fire that does not cease, the worm that does not cease. There was actually a tardigrade that lived within that within that fire that could survive that heat. And what was the reason why that fire was started in the first place? Every last idolater was thrown into that fire. That was Josiah's solution. Prophets of Baal, prophets of Ashtaroth, everybody gets thrown into that fire. And not only that, but he made sure that every generation after him kept that fire burning. Now, is there a time when it went out? Maybe when Nebuchadnezzar came or something? I don't know. I don't know all that stuff. All I know is that during Yeshua's time, Gehenna was burning. And Josiah is the one who began that destruction. The Valley of Hinnom. The reason I bring this up is because what you need to realize is that the universe and all of those things, what I've taught you about Fibonacci in the cycles teaching, what I've taught you about the 137.5 degrees that branches on trees grow in, that's actually the golden mean divided by 360, etc., etc. I'm sorry, multiplied by 360. What we have here is a system that is designed to be in connection with us in a relationship aspect in such a way as to create a symbiotic unity and flow of energy between the plants, the animals, the humans, and the supernatural realm, all working together in balance. Okay? And that's why the Noahic laws give those commandments and those instructions that way, because a Noahide could come along and be justified in dwelling in the land with the Israelites without being in covenant with Yahweh. Don't get me wrong, they would eventually become a proselyte. And of course, the rabbis could, well, depending on which house it was, House of Hillel believed that a Gentile could be taught Torah. The house of Shammai said that you could not teach a Gentile Torah, that their hearts were wicked, which consequently got latched onto by the Gnostics. And the Gnostics, of course, then propagated that to Marcion. Consequently, he's the guy who canonized the New Testament, also the one who actually coined the word New Testament versus Old Testament, because he believed the Old Testament God was a demiurge or a ego of the righteous God, or another God, and the New Testament God was this loving, kind creator. Consequently, he eventually became labeled a heretic and kicked out of the church, but they kept a lot of his stuff and a lot of his wording, which consequently Old New Testament is one of them. But moving on from that, then Augustine comes along, loves Marcion's stuff, continuing to be an anti-Semite and also condemning humanity to this total depravity, this idea that we are so desperately wicked that we cannot actually do anything good, right? And then that we're in the need of a savior and all of the other things that, of course, Luther comes along and propagates, and now here we have American Protestant progressive Christianity. Why do I call it progressive Christianity? Because you abandoned Torah. You progressed away from the Torah. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. You progressed away from the Torah. The dragon says that you have what? The commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ. You progressed away from Torah. Well, let's find out how serious that has become. So first and foremost, two things that we need to do. Number one is we need to accept that there are Gentiles and Jews given the same instruction. We also need to accept that none of that instruction can positionally seat us the way that the imputation of Yeshua seated us. What do I mean by that? He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. That righteousness of God cannot be earned, nor can it be taken away as a result of bad behavior. It is situated and therefore imputed to us as a result of the Lamb being slain from the foundations of the earth. A solution to the malevolent energies who would receive the light but would not give the light. Yeshua is that solution. He is that he's that valve, if you will, on them to dump the light out of them, so that the light would not bring judgment upon this earth the way that it was because of the malevolent beings. Something that I proposed that was foreseen or perhaps practiced a number of cycles until they figured out that that just wasn't going to work. And that's when Yeshua came up with that solution. Of course, Yeshua being what? The soul of Torah. Torah itself goes, hey, we got to fix this. Okay. So the next thing that we need to get into is the concept of curse. So let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 28. And specifically, we are going to be looking at Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 15. Now, there's a couple of things that we probably need to get into. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and switch this over to the NASB because there's a number of things that I want to get into here. In verse 15 of Deuteronomy 28, we begin the curses. Okay? Now, Moses in Deuteronomy 30 says, behold, I set before you a blessing and a curse, right? Okay, so now, it shall come about if you do not obey Yahweh your Elohim. In the Hebrew, it says, listen to the voice of. Okay, let's just really quick here. When we speak, the tone that we use will be based upon the state that we're in. The rise and fall of pitch creates emphasis and nuance. The start and stop in a consonant creates a break or a rhythm in the song of vowels. Vowels themselves are music or melody. Consonants are breaks in that melody that creates rhythm. And when we speak at a certain tempo, and we maintain that rhythm throughout that speech. If it is something that is being articulated very well, then there will always be a meter to it, okay? And that meter will follow that rhythm of stops. And that meter will follow that rhythm of thoughts. And so as we sing to each other and create rhythm in the song that we're singing, we are creating vibration. Vibration is going out, vibrating along the sound waves and pulling my eardrum in and out as you speak. So when we are working with the idea of the voice of God, we could lean in the direction of an energetic outburst of frequency and pitch variation that contains stops or rhythms. Probably way more powerful than anything that you could ever hear with a human ear, but yet at the same time is some sort of vibrational energy. We can go there. However, the idiomatic language of Hebrew is a very important language system that is very, very misunderstood. Why do I say it's important? Because that's the language that the Bible was written in. But then I'm going to take it a step further. And yes, I did call it a Bible. For you Christians, I call it a Bible. But the premise is that basically what you have is this system of idiomatic words not meaning literally what they mean. So in English, when I am speaking, I may or may not use a figure of speech. For example, if I say I'm about to blow your mind, well, A, I'm probably not blowing on your head, or B, I'm not making your head explode, right? I mean, there's not actually a violent projectile display of gray matter on the wall behind you. It's a figure of speech. And I can switch between literal and figurative very easily. In Hebrew, it is not that way. In Hebrew, the use of a word is most likely and usually idiomatic. In other words, it doesn't mean what it says. The reason for that is because Hebrew is such a concrete language. What you see, what you hear, and what you can feel are it. And so, for example, you cut off the head of an enemy and blood pumps out of his neck while he's laying on the ground. You say that's red water, right? But then you say, you know what? That water is moving. And so now we have in the ancient pictographic Hebrew the word for blood, dam, which is a dalet, the door, and water, mem, which is what? Moving water. And specifically water that goes back and forth like the door of a tent. Now, the relevance of this comes into play when you think about the fact that moving water is sufficient to describe blood to a Hebrew. But let's just say that you're some Englishman coming over from the islands of Tarshish during the time when the pictographic language was in place and finds a piece of pottery after learning a few meanings of the pictographs and sees the word dam. And it says moving water. Do you think for a moment that they're ever going to actually identify that word as blood without proper description and instruction of what it actually is? Perhaps even demonstration. Cut off the head of the animal and look at that stuff pumping out, that's dumb, right? But without that explanation, it's not there. So think for a second that you can just go get the Strongs and get a word and say, oh, look, that's the Hebrew word for that English word. No, it don't work that way. You don't know the idioms. You don't know what the voice of the Lord is. But at the same time, you do, because right here, it explains that obeying or listening to the voice of the Lord is Shema, by the way. In fact, let's just go look at it real quick. In the Hebrew, here it is right there. There's our word. Most beautiful word in all of Judaism, Shema. Okay? So yes, okay. So in the English, it's doing it as obey, but look at that. If you do not listen to the voice of Yahweh, your Elohim, oh, here we go. To observe. Let's look at that word, because you guys know that has a powerful meaning. To observe, right? Let's see if it's the word observe. No, it is not the word observe, is it? No, it is the word guard. In fact, a shomer, which let's see if we've got a shomer here. No, we don't. Okay. A shomer is a police officer in Israel. A guard, right? Okay, so it says, it shall come about if you do not listen to Yahweh your Elohim and guard all his commandments and his statutes, which I will charge you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. So now let's take a look at this word curse. So it is the Hebrew word kalala, and it is going to come from the root, or I mean from the lexical root kalal, right? And we're just going to jump straight into the lexicon here. It's going to be Strong's Concordance H7043. We'll just cut and paste that number into the digital ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible, which covers our pictographic language. Not perfectly, but it does cover it very well, very exhaustive. And of course, the word for cursing is to belittle, to regard or portray as less impressive or important, to be light in weight, to curse or despise in the sense of making light. Okay, let's go back to our verse. Let's read it again in that sense. And also, I want to look at this word really quick in its grammar. So this word kalal, which is right here, is going to be in the plural absolute state. Feminine. Yes, we know that's feminine. Article. Oh wow, so that's interesting. They put that, it puts the definite article. So the curse, the curses will come upon you. Interesting. And of course, this is the Hebrew word these, of course, uses that same grammar. But here's the part that's interesting about this is that the actual code, let's see, NCFPA. Let's check absolute real quick. Absolute state is a standard form of a word in contrast to its modified form called the construct. Okay, so it's not in a construct, it's not of. Got you. Okay, so in that sense, it's interesting, but it is actually stating it as just a flat out, there's no extreme use of the verb or anything like that to cause it to become a noun. So listen to, let's read this way. I wanted to see if it had the causative, okay? And we will look at this word overtake in a minute. Because this is what I want you to think about. And it's very important. But it shall come about if you do not listen to the voice of your God, or I'm sorry, of Yahweh your Elohim, to observe, to do all of his Torah, right? And his Hohim, right? Which is statutes, with which I charge you today, that all these curses, no, all these belittlements will come upon you and overtake you. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this word overtake just real quick, because we need to understand what that means in an idiomatic sense, because obviously we are still dealing with an idiomatic usage of these words. Oh, nashag. Okay, yeah, to reach or overtake or take hold upon. How can I explain nashag? Okay, so the way that I want you to think about nashag is when you are in a race and one person passes another. So it's interesting. It's not saying that it would come and like take hold of you per se, but nashag is the driving of a chariot, and the premise behind it in nashag, there's actually a word nahag, which also the driving of a chariot, but they are cognate with each other. So nashag is, or nasag is a driving of a chariot in such a way as to pass up, which means what? It will precede you. So it will pursue you, it will catch you, and it will precede you. Okay? Now, when we're dealing with the world, we need to understand context. God so loved the world, but at the same time, we're not supposed to be friends with it. At the same time, you have a relationship with the soil, which is the world we need to sow into. Oh, wait, we're not the ones sowing into it. God is. How? What did he sow? He sowed the Torah that you disobey and say that you can eat pork because Jesus died and fulfilled those laws. The Torah that says that you can practice the pagan customs, which I'll get into in a minute. So getting back to tradition, we have a American tradition that is actually very much American, that ended up becoming very influential upon the world, which consequently I could say that teachers fall under the greater judgment. And so if we taught it to the world, we're under greater judgment than the world who's practicing it. And maybe I should say it a different way. We taught it globally, because the world, remember, is the potential energy that you sow into and utilize, the dunamis that's in Yeshua's power when the woman with the issue of blood touches the hem of his garment and it flows out of him. The same dunamis that's present in Revelation, the same dunamis that's present in the exploits that those who were awakened to righteousness in Daniel chapter 12 do, the exploits, right? Okay. So we have a foundation that is attached to that world, but I'm talking about a global influence, right? A global influence, very different. We taught the world as a global body, to practice the customs of America. Well, America commercialized a practice that is forbidden in Torah. And I actually had a Christian friend tell me, hey, if we have dominion, then don't we have a right to take somebody else's religion, take a cultural piece of someone else's religion, and turn around and assign it to a celebration on behalf of the Son of God? No, because the jurisdictional and conditional authority that you are given is contingent upon your obedience to the voice of God, which is the teaching and instruction of God, or the Torah. In other words, you don't have the authority if you do not demonstrate that you are in covenant. Now, I didn't say that that's how you get in covenant. I said demonstrating you're in covenant is obedience. Okay? So, what is this belittling? Well, first of all, you need to accept that belittling is not bullying or making fun of. Those curses actually have intelligence. It says that they land on people. It says that they pursue people. It says that they overtake people. It says that they will actually go into their future and go before them, so that as they enter their future, the curse has already had its effect. That's scary. Oh, because you're not willing to keep Torah. But it gets worse. As a corporate collective conscience, you actually can create a positional curse. Now, there's two elements to a positional curse. The first is a curse in and of itself is very temporal. It only falls upon the guilty. Well, you need to understand that once a person no longer believes themselves to be guilty, or the justice of the universe doesn't believe them to be guilty any longer, then guess what? They are no longer guilty, and the curse will fly away like a dove. It says, like a dove, a curse flies away from the innocent. Okay, so that being the case, as we look at the concept of a curse, we need to understand that there is a principle in Torah that if a person practices the traditions or follows and lives in the lifestyle of the culture of those who do the things that are forbidden in Torah, instead of us obligating those who dwell among us to be obedient to Torah, we're doing the opposite. We're practicing what they practice. They actually shall be cut off from the people. Obviously, that's a given. That's what it says. But furthermore, Yahweh says, do not take what they're doing and worship me the way they worship their gods. So now we have two issues. Issue number one, we are not actually asserting that they are supposed to be obedient to Torah and that we are the authority in the land. Second, we are doing the opposite. We are actually taking what they practice and turning around and assigning it to our God as if he's going to be grateful for us worshiping him that way. Now, we are dealing with the intensification of all power in the universe, and there's a couple of things you need to know. Number one, it's so big that your minuscule little action doesn't do what you think it does. The reason why the intensification of all power in the universe stuffed into a perceivable God called Yahweh actually can become angry with you because you worship a statue and put food by that statue is because you're the Elohim here on this earth. And what a frustration to create a God and say, here you go, here's a planet to rule, and you start worshiping the rocks on the planet. Is it about jealousy? No, that's not the actual word that is in the Hebrew when it says, I am a jealous God. It is not about some emotionally depraved individual who just can't handle not having the credit and can't handle not having the attention. Dear God in heaven, you paint your God into a narcissist. No wonder skeptics and atheists and anti-religion people get so vulgar about him, because you have painted him into this thing, painted humanity into this thing. Dear God, if I went as a human being into a group of people and they told me, you're so evil that there's nothing you could do good. And then after that said, but if you worship this God who actually gets mad if you don't and destroys your land if you don't, oh, here's another thing. Don't worship any other gods. That's important. But if you worship this God and you give him all the attention, you give him all the credit, then things will go well for you, but only after you die. I would totally walk away from that group. And there would be no joy of my salvation in that thought process. Dear God, how I was manipulated when I became a Christian. It's appalling. Okay, so if we were to not utilize the foundational principles that are in place, basically kind of the switches to activate the mechanism of the power, right? Or the potential, because remember the good seed was sown into there, but the tares were sown in as well. The energy itself is not polarized. The energy is actually activated by the things that were sown into it. The enemy who sowed the things into it, we probably don't need to get into that today, but they intentionally set it up in such a way so that it's counterfeit. So it looks like wheat, but it cannot feed you. And furthermore, here's another thing that people don't know about tares. Tares actually can't reproduce. You can't carry them to the next generation, which means they have to be sown again and again and again and again and again with that good seed that could potentially propagate through volunteering every generation. So now the good seed, or the Torah, is the foundational activation of the potential energy that is the field or the world. And that world aspect is just the energy itself. So for God so loved the energy that he gave his only son, right? Now becomes an idea that what he was really trying to preserve in us and what Christ came to do was to awaken the Elohim within you. If there's ever anything that is more outrageously obvious in Peter walking on the water, was that Yeshua was being an example for us. So what's the first thing he does when he comes on the scene? Does he go in and say, the end is near, you need to protect yourself from the hell, from the wrath to come, the eternal conscious punishment. You need Jesus Christ, because nobody, look at the way of the master system. State the law, the Torah, right? Because it's in Revelation, it says we'll be judged by Torah, right? State the Torah, then ask them if they've broken it, and then explain that in Revelation it says that they will have their part in the lake of fire or hell, right? And here's the way to get out of it. Oh my God. Really good salesman. That's I could say that. They're really good salesmen. They're using some of the most powerful salesman tactics there are. Fear of missing out, the fear of failure, there's a number of other ones. But the point being is that that is not how this works. Yeshua goes in and heals everyone unless they didn't want it. If they didn't want him there, that was different. So, what are we supposed to be doing? We're supposed to be going in and healing. Well, how can we go in and healing if we don't have authority, we don't have the energy, and we definitely don't have the collective conscience? We are no longer connected. We're no longer connected, and we spend our days individually operating as Elohim in a universe where we are supposed to all be together in this connected thread. The thread's still there, you just ignore it. You ever have those moments where you're sitting there and you're like, you know what? I should call my friend, and the phone rings? That's that thread. Okay, so now what we need to do is ask ourselves, does the application of the promised land rules or regulations extend outside of the promised land? Well, interestingly enough, there's a number of people who argue that they don't have to keep Torah because they are not in the land. They don't have to keep Torah because they are not in the land of Israel. If they were in the land of Israel, they would keep the Torah, and the people around them would have to keep the Torah. But because they're not in the land, they're not actually going to have to keep it. And this is what I will say. I believe it is when Paul is in Troas, Troas, I believe. Troas. I think that's where he was at. And he actually, at that time, keeps the Passover with the people of that city. Now, in your English version, I believe that it is going to say Easter. Let me take a look here real quick. Let's go look at this. We'll go over here to Acts chapter, I believe it's 17. Maybe it was Berea. Maybe it's 18. Tell you what, let me do this. We'll go to it's not where I thought it was. So there's me being valuable. But we'll just so you can learn how to do this, we'll just go and say Easter. Okay, 12, my bad. Oh, yeah, that's actually not it. Let's try this. In nope, it's not going to do it that way. Okay. I can't remember where it's at, but I can tell you that I have seen it in the King James version where it says Easter. Now, the okay. Has somebody just tell me off camera where it's at? In Acts 20, is it? What verse was it? Okay, well, this is interfering with the broadcast, so we're just going to skip it. Point being is that Paul kept Passover in a Gentile city, okay, outside of Israel. And the people who were with him, who were Gentiles by Christian definition, practiced it with him, okay? Now, there's a bunch of stuff we could get into about this. There's a number of issues right off the bat that completely contradict the argument that you have to be in the land. But I'm just going to propose the biggest and most important one is that the kingdom of heaven is within you, and you are the Mishkan. You are the temple of the Ruach HaKodesh. You are that. There was never supposed to be a tabernacle or a temple that came after the golden calf. I try to tell you guys that. And if you knew the seriousness of it, look when the temple is destroyed in this season of the golden calf. The first temple, the Temple of Solomon, designed by David, built by Solomon, and cared for by Josiah, Hezekiah, all kinds of kings coming along and refurbishing it and relaying the gold, etc., destroyed by Nebuzaradan, the general of Nebuchadnezzar's army, during the season of the golden calf, during the straits, right? The 17th of Tammuz, the golden calf is built. The 9th of Av, and the 3 weeks in between the 9th of Av and the golden calf, all are historically times when the counterfeit of Judaism is exposed. Now, I want to say something. The final solution proposed in Parliament in Germany was determined during that time. And I want you to understand that Heinrich Himmler got his orders on the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av is a time over and over and over in Judaism of suffering, but it's also been a time of the removal of the unnecessary things. And now I want to make clear, I in no way am indicating that Shoah, or the Holocaust, that you don't speak of, was a result of the judgment of God. And anybody who thinks that has some of the most impure anti-Semitic blood that would ever be present in a human being. That is not how our God works. And he is long-suffering even with our Jewish brothers and sisters who have chosen to reject the Messiah. Because he's long-suffering with you, that's for sure. Because God knows you know your secret sins. Those ones that you would not want anybody to know. Those ones that could potentially, under the right circumstances, land you in a prison cell. But it's important for you to understand that there are things that happen in this system of history that make it clear that it's not supposed to be there in the first place. The temple was one of them. We were not supposed to have a physical building because we are. And if we are Israel, then where we put our feet is the land of Israel. And if Paul goes to Troas or wherever it was he went to, and then it indicates that it is he goes to a different, like a Gentile land. Guys, I think Troas is and near Greece, if I recall right. Like near the Arpeggio Islands, I think. I'm not. Don't get me wrong on that. Arpeggio. Oh, I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Get the idea, though, that he brought Passover into another land and kept it. Because where he puts his feet is the land of Israel. And those who dwell around him have to keep Torah with him if indeed they are not enemies of God. Yeah, I don't think you're ready for that statement. But the premise is that Paul goes into a cursed land where they kill children and women and men and animals. What does James say we need to do? We need to write a letter to the Gentiles and tell them stop eating things that are strangled. Right? Do not practice idolatry. Do not practice sexual immorality. Where do we get that definition, Rabbi James? Oh, we get it from Torah, Leviticus chapter 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22. I think that's where it's at. So, what's my point? My point is that the practice of Gentile culture, as it would be understood in the Mishnaic period, would be any practice of pagan practices that will result in the shedding of blood. Now, is it the mixing of potions? No. We see that in the prophets. Is it the burning of incense? Not if it's done correctly, right? Not if it's used the way it is supposed to be used. Right? We do see an abuse of a burning of incense in the groves and in the high places, right? Hezekiah doesn't tear down the high places, but Josiah does, right? There's a number of other things, but the point is that a pagan practice is something that is related to the exploitation and violation of rights of a human being and or animals. Not from the sense that animals have rights, but from the sense that they need to be protected by us. Okay? And so in that point, cultural choices, I'm sorry, okay, let me social choices to practice cultural tradition that is forbidden by Torah will result in a curse upon that entire people. That curse will be a diminishing in power. Well, that sounds familiar. A diminishing in authority. Oh, that also sounds familiar. Because what, pray tell, did good old King Jimmy give us? A Bible wrought with instruction to love suffering and enjoy poverty and be grateful for the rulership of the king. Oh, if you understood how much he exploited the word glory or exploited the words for royalty and all of those speeches that he put into that thing. But oh, he was giving us a gift because the common people couldn't read the Vulgate. First of all, he wasn't the first one to do it, but he sure was the one to dupe all you goofy Christians who think that the King James is the only correct Bible. A sickening thought that subtle brainwashing trickled into such a beautiful people who believe freedom is the foundation of everything that exists, who threw off the tyranny of a king and then sits down on Sunday morning and reads the tyranny of a king. Goofy people. So now what you need to understand is that it's very possible that the reason why the authority that you would have over the field, which would be the instruction given to the field to activate. The field itself and the corporate collective itself have all lost those things. Those things have been unseated because we are told in Deuteronomy chapter 12, don't worship Yahweh the way the pagans worship or where the nations worship their gods. We took all that stuff and started worshiping Yahweh the way the nations worship their gods and don't realize that all of those traditions. There's a book called Fossilized Customs, and I can tell you there's a number of things in it that are very extreme for me that I actually had to work through with that voice that I had from when I was a kid, trying to tell me, hey, look, don't go this route, don't go that far into it, don't be that involved in it. And I didn't listen. And so there's a point in time where he had to humble me and remind me he doesn't need my help with zeal. And so as a result of that, basically, there is a point in time where that book becomes inappropriate. But I can tell you, in it, there is an exposure of cultural practices that have forgotten where they came from and why. If you understood the power of a spell, if you understood the action of a worker of darkness who supersedes you in so many ways, you say, oh, I just use the name of Jesus. I'm going to tell you right now, experiential knowledge overrides written knowledge and overrides doctrinal knowledge and overrides theological knowledge. And I can tell you right now, people would say Jesus Christ to my face and would not make me go away, could not cast me out, could not remove me from their presence, and couldn't stop me from cursing them. So you might need to go back to school and learn something about how to do spiritual warfare. But one of the things you need to know is the workers of darkness are not bound by Torah, and they are not bound by Christianity. They're not bound by the suppressive, oppressive, doctrinal manipulations of the authorities of the Church of Catholicism, the Church of Protestantism, and the Church of Anglicanism. Which is what? The Pope, the eldership, and the king as authorities. And so what you need to understand is within all of this is an aspect of basically locking in or positioning a curse that will not go away. It's making a curse permanent. It's like when the Israelites would go in to the promised land, they would go to the high place and begin worshiping these other gods. And all of a sudden, the promised land did not offer them what it had offered before. So much so that there was a famine in the land sufficient enough that there was a woman who had agreed. There were two prostitutes who had agreed that they were going to eat their children. And in the middle of the night, one stole the other one, and they ate one, and then the other one stole the other one and left. Right? Or not stole the other one, but took their other one and left after they had eaten the one lady's child. The king grabs his clothes and tears them. Elijah comes up to him and says, why are your clothes torn? You're a king. And he goes, dude, we're dying. And he says, tomorrow we'll have food. Why was the famine there? What does it say? Yahweh says, if I bring a famine into a land, right? If I bring a famine into the land, and Noah, Daniel, and Job were present, I would not preserve it for their sakes. If I bring a famine, right? So who brought the famine into the land? He did. And that famine caused people to be eating their children. We're not there yet, but I can tell you, you need to think about that concept and then understand that that's a curse. That's the diminishing. Where did the food go? Right? There is an absolute mystical mythological, esoteric connection between nature and humans and their misbehavior. Now, you notice I haven't brought up very specific details of these cursed practices. And there's a couple of reasons why. The first one is that I want to have empathy for a person who was raised in Christianity and believes that they are walking the right path with God, and they believe that they're in a relationship with Jesus Christ, who go and they set up their Christmas trees and they go chase their Easter eggs and they go do all the things, and they believe that they are in the right. I want to have empathy for people who are ignorant of that. But for those of you who have been introduced to the Hebrew roots, and for those of you who have taken the moment to say and realize that they are not, I can tell you that there are a number of things that we need to eliminate out of our lives that are the world, but not the part of the world that God loved. The part of the world that he would like to see removed. And those are those practices that violate the rights of people. And those cultural origins that are in that. I believe that the American holiday system is cursed. And I believe that the American holiday system has positioned Israel in a curse. Now, I'm not going to get all doom and gloom on you and say that the end of the world is coming because of the immorality of America. What I'm going to say is that some of our economic suffering and some of our failure as Christians to have the power to effect change has come in the form of practicing customs we don't understand and then doing things to damage our relationship with the soil, doing things to damage our relationship with the animals. The gentleness and the kindness of the intensification of all power in the universe comes in the form, in its simplicity, of empathy for a weaker vessel, us. The corporate collective conscience, known as the bride, is the weaker vessel in this relational connection to our God. And therefore, this is not about wrath. This is not about coming through and whooping up on people. This is about the dynamic, balanced, symbiotic, relational connection between the soil, the human, and the sky, and that which is under the soil and what is in the sea. And a flow and balance and connectivity to all of them. Just go research the golden mean when it comes to your body, and then realize that's the same golden mean that's on the tree. That's the same golden mean that's in the cat. That's the same golden mean that's in art, in expression, in buildings, and all these things, because people don't realize that they're going to do God things. Gods do God things. And you will find ceremony and buildings and practices where they're trying to do it. Torah is the path. Torah is the good seed sown into the potential energy that is the power behind the change that this world needs, that is the power behind the unity. And when I'm talking about unity, I'm not talking about us agreeing on doctrine. We'll never do that. We will never actually agree on the interpretation on a verse in the Bible. Sooner or later, there's going to be a conflict. But the vibrational unity is absolutely necessary. And the harmony between the heavens and the earth and Adam have to come back into synchronization. And the universe has been trying to tell us that. The land has been trying to tell us that. The animals have been trying to tell us that. And you guys are worried about some stupid red cow that's being burned and turned into ashes in Israel. And you don't realize that's not even Israel. You are Israel. Yeah, that's called the state of Israel. And I honor the fact that they are sovereign. But I can tell you right now, all they are is house sitters for us who have the testimony of Yeshua and the commandments of God. And I can tell you they are stewards of the land until we who have been promised it get there. We're living in exile now, and I get that. But that doesn't change the fact that what we're doing is practicing what got us kicked out of the land in the first place. And if you're adopted, sorry, you're in that curse as well. If you're not bloodline Israel, you're adopted, guess what? You get the family's baggage. Okay, so what do we know? We know the world is an idiomatic statement or description of the energy behind the power of the Elohim that were created to rule this earth. The exploits and miracles and healings and all of the other things that Yeshua did were examples of what we can do. The book of Acts is wrought with proof of that. And it didn't stop after the book of Acts like some of the neo-Anglicans, or should I say Baptists, have claimed. And unfortunately, the Presbyterians came along and pretty much followed suit when Calvin kind of presented the same argument. The book of Acts was proof of the fact that Yeshua was setting an example that was lost, completely lost in 325 AD, when Christianity became a rulership, not a sovereignty in and of itself. The world is an energy that can be sown into. What part of the world are we not to be friends with? We are not to be friends with the terrors, the antinomian, Torahless practitioners who take pagan customs and assign it to Christ and assign it to Yahweh, and ignore, blow off, and claim that it is evil to practice the feasts. That is the terrors, and that is the world that we cannot be friends with. If the field is the world and the seed is the Torah, then we need to understand that the Torah is how we polarize the energy that is being used by the workers of darkness. I've seen it with my own eyes, and I cannot deny what I've seen, and nor can those who were beside me, nor can those who were just as wicked, because they've seen it too. And so we can listen to all kinds of theological theories, and we can listen to all kinds of fluff about what the Bible is supposedly about. But our experiential knowledge will override that. And my experiential knowledge says that if there is power in the universe, it comes from him, but it can be exploited. And every time it's been exploited, he wants that nation wiped out. So be careful that you understand that there is a way and a purpose in which this stuff is supposed to be activated and practiced and intended. Recall that traditions of men destroy men. Traditions of men annul Torah. But we are a traditional, repetitious, practitioner type of people, which means you repeat ritual. You repeat. In fact, ritual itself means to repeat. And so in its simplicity, somebody does something, it works, and the next person comes along and tries the same thing and it works. When you sit down in a college lecture hall and the professor teaches you something and you repeat it, you are doing a ritual. There is a danger to the level at which you don't understand what your mouth can do, what your actions do in the practices that you are practicing, and what a curse actually does to the land and to your home and to your family and to people. And if you think for a moment you've been delivered from the curse, oh my gosh, I had this idiot teach one time that we had access to the blessings of Deuteronomy 28 without having to keep Torah anymore, and we were delivered from the curses of Deuteronomy 28 because Christ was hung on a tree. I cannot tell you the warnings I gave that man and then watched him fall. And he fell so hard that the dynamic, magnanimous leader that he was paled, completely eclipsed by the darkness that he dipped into. In fact, I'm pretty sure that not only did he lose his home, his vehicle, his wife, and those were not connected. You do not mess with Torah. And you do not mess with the mechanism. That's what was sown into the world for a reason. So we need to honor that. We need to protect it, shomer, right? We need to protect it. So we need to listen and protect, not keep, not observe, protect. From what? From extinction. Because if Torah ever goes extinct, it will become the judgment of this world. That's what it says. It will activate. Is it too late? I don't know. We're in a drought, right? Which consequently would be considered a famine back then. Same word, kind of, a lack of food, and they've had to resort to engineering food in such a way as to be able to overcome the curse of the pests, right? Et cetera, et cetera. In fact, it's interesting. It says that Yahweh would return to the people what the locust had eaten. I believe it's in Joel. But what you don't realize is a few verses earlier, it says, I will send the locust to eat the crops. So what we're going to do, we're going to modify the food genetically so that we can spray it with a pesticide to overcome the curse instead of walking in Torah. We are the stiff-necked people. The final thing that you need to think about and realize about the world is that culture that is offensive, but not necessarily detrimental to Torah, is not worldly. Your opinion about how somebody should dress, how somebody should walk, how somebody should conduct themselves, your opinion about a person's gender, your opinion about their lifestyle choices, your opinion about anything where you have a bias does not equate to worldliness. Worldliness is anti-Torah. Torah. Worldliness is the Torah's been done away with. Worldliness is when my friend can go and eat pork and say, well, I'm eating pork because I am liberated from my sin. That is what it's not. So you need to understand that tares is the antinomian behavior of human beings. The good seed, Torah. An activation of social justice by which people are not allowed to sacrifice their children anymore. People are not allowed to exploit humans anymore. People are not allowed to abuse animals anymore. Okay? So I think it's important in our actions and behavior in this country that we modify how we practice what we practice and when and why. It is time to wake up and no longer be conformed because you have special childhood memories that you don't want to let go of. If I hear another Christian say one of the reasons why they don't want to keep Torah is because they don't want to give up the special memories. If they knew the level of demonic curse that they were perpetuating, they would weep, fast for 40 days and 40 nights and tear their clothing and throw ashes over their head without even knowing why they're doing it. But they don't want to hear that. They don't want to listen. They're more attached to that. So what do we need to do? We need to go back to the beginning and begin to restructure our cultural responsibilities. We need to restructure our traditions. I taught you that last week. We need to restructure not our doctrine per se. There's plenty of doctrine that is legit and appropriate. But we need to accept that Christianity itself was founded in anti-Semitism. Christianity was founded in 325 AD. And in 325 AD, they decided what kind of God we had. They decided what kind of religion we were going to be. And they decided what kind of holidays they wanted to celebrate. 336 AD, they went on to eliminate some more of that at the Council of Laodicea. We have our work cut out for us. Yes, we do. We do. In fact, there's probably things I still need to purge out of my life that probably create a positional curse. But what you need to understand about a positional curse is it's a perpetuated curse. So it's not just the curse of the disobedience, it's the fact that it's continued to be practiced from generation to generation and there was never a stop for it. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why we don't have what we had in the book of Acts. At the very least, we probably need to eliminate those things. And I don't know at what cost, and I don't know how extreme we have to be about that. But I would propose to you that if it was the difference between who we are supposed to be in our walk and example that Yeshua showed versus who we are now, I would propose that we would do it even at the cost of our very lives, and that we would do it violently. That we would smash the idols and go into the garage and get all the Christmas decorations and put them in the middle and just start smashing them with sledgehammers and then put them in a big old bonfire. But we won't. We won't do that. Because there's some sort of special memory on that one little ornament that you created all those years ago and hung on the tree. At the cost of true, actual Christ religion Christianity. Not this fluff that was created, but the true, actual religion that was stolen. That's what needs to change. And that's the responsibilities that we have. And I don't know if we are just too lazy of a people that we're just not even going to try. That we're not even going to try to even start the process. So it's unfortunate. And I will close the world teaching, the world series with this. The world has nothing to do with the people. The world has to do with how you use the energy. And the world has to do with those who have already done something with the energy that is contrary to Torah. That is the world that we're not supposed to be the friend of. But the one that we are supposed to love is the potential, that potential energy that can be activated through Torah, obviously, but that is designed to bring us into harmony with creation, into harmony with the